Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's very exciting call on the Clean Energy Academy. Today's date is June 23rd, 2019, and we have a very honored guest, Aaron Murakami, with us today, and he's going to be talking about some of his latest stuff. I'm going to let Tavon completely take over. He has been preparing for quite a while for this particular interview because we're very excited about Aaron's work. Tavon's prepared a presentation of sorts and a whole bunch of great interview questions. So in the meantime, if you're on this call with us live and you have any questions at all for anybody, Aaron or anybody else in the call, please put them in the chat. I'll be manning the chat in the background. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Thanks so much and welcome, Aaron.
Thank you.
Hi, Aaron. Great. So I'm just going to open up the introduction here. Aaron Murakami is an inventor, researcher, and founder of AMP Electronic Media, a comprehensive alternative energy website having over 40 downloadable ebooks and filmed lectures available, which are considered the most authoritative sources of information in the free energy sciences. He is a driving force in both the clean and alternative energy and health arena, and also co-founded both the Energetic Forum and the Energy Science Forum. In addition, he co-founded the Vedini-Linderman Energy Conferences in 2012, now known as the Energy Science and Technology Conference, and is attended by enthusiasts, researchers, and engineers from all over the world. Aaron has authored and produced various ebooks and educational films, including The Quantum Key, a course in mind power, Ignition Secrets, Water Fuel Secrets, and others. A multidisciplinary researcher, inventor, and web publisher, he holds patents in the field of plasma ignition systems, which we'll talk a little bit about today, and continues the work of Stan Mayer and others toward practical applications of water fuel and other on-demand synthetic fuels for internal combustion engines. Thank you, Aaron, for being here with us.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So Aaron, I know Aaron is hosting this year's Energy and Science Technology Conference. We'll go ahead and talk about this. The mother of all free energy conferences on July the 11th through the 14th. But like every year, it has already sold out. And Aaron, it's the 8th year of the conference, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's been going since 2012. And as you know, the first couple conferences were called the Vedini-Lindemann conferences, and I changed it to a more generic Energy Science and Technology Conference. Mm-hmm. And every year that is in Hayden, Idaho, which is north of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is just on the other side of the border from Spokane, Washington. And anybody coming, yeah, it's about maybe an hour drive from the Spokane International Airport. And the Eagles Lodge is kind of out there a little bit, but it's because the reason we have it there is John Bedini. He passed in November 2016, but his shop was just down the road from the Eagles Lodge. He was a trustee of the Eagles Lodge, and he just lived a couple minutes from there. And so, it's kind of a tribute to him also, but I also like to support the lodge because it's a nonprofit organization and they do a lot of community work like children's hospitals, and there are a lot of the money that's raised through the lodge goes to those type of community projects, and I kind of like to keep it there. Plus it's kind of a manageable size. Every year about 150 people come. I limit the ticket sales to 150 people, and actually this year Eric Dollard was at my home for about a month. And he was only supposed to be there for maybe about 10 days or so to help him with this presentation. And one thing led to the next, and I forgot to yank the payment page, and we accidentally oversold a handful of tickets that we didn't intend to. So anybody who's been there knows it really is, a venue for about 150 people, plus staff and vendors and presenters and stuff. But yeah, it sells out every year, sells out pretty quick. We've actually been sold out for probably about a month or more. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be a 4-day weekend with about maybe, 17, actually close to about 20 presentations. That in quite a conference, it'll be very memorable.
Well, that's pretty impressive, and it just seems like every time we see the event for the next year's conference coming up, it just seems like the tickets are just selling out earlier and earlier. But it looks like, although people won't be able to get to the conference this year because the seats are already sold out, the presentations and other footage from the conference, it will be made available as
Sure.
As something that they can access when they sign up, going on to, what is it, the EnergyScienceConference.com?
Yeah, you mean to be able to get the videos after the conference?
After the conference, right.
Yeah. So the conference, is from the 11th to the 14th or so, and usually takes me about 2 months to get all the videos released, and I try to put them out maybe 2 to 3 per week. And so right after the conference, I'll be sitting down with Phil, who videos all the PowerPoints and the speakers, and I have to sit there with him and watch every single minute where all the PowerPoint and the speaker is kind of faded back back and forth, and editing out any extraneous noise or interruptions or glitches, which inevitably happen here and there. But so yeah, those are available as paid digital downloads. Real short ones are usually about $17 all the way up to about $47, and they are in MP4 format in a zip file. And I think you and Hope are going to be maybe having links to these, on your websites. And so as soon as I know which ones are going to be coming out in what order, I'll definitely let you know, so that everybody who's a part of your community will know which ones are coming out and when. So throughout, starting in the middle of July, so I'd imagine by the end of July, the first ones are going to be rolling out, and that'll continue for about 8 weeks. A lot of work.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And I mean, if anything I learned from Hope is the amount of time spent pouring behind footage of doing the editing and syncing everything up. And yeah, great. And I know Valerie, she's been fantastic being in communication with you, dealing with on the Free Energy website as being a platform to be able to get that content out there to our members. So yeah, we're honored, looking forward to being able to do that after the event. And if I was there stateside, I tell you what, I mean, if I could, I would be going to every single conference, because I look at the footage and it's just, you see the dynamism, the people getting together and just everyone of like mind trying to just really share information and get something built, get the solutions out there. So yeah, no, this is very exciting. So Aaron, we're just going to talk just a little bit about what got you interested to get into alternative energy as like a professional career.
Well, early on in my early 20s, I had some different experiences that kind of led me into that direction. And in my early 20s, this was in the early to mid 1990s, and I didn't really know anybody. I didn't know John Bedini or Peter Lindemann, or I didn't even know the terminology free energy out there. I thought I invented that term to describe perpetual motion kind of stuff. And not knowing anybody or knowing anything about any of it, I was searching online for answers, and I realized, I'm not really qualified to know what's what. I could tell a lot of stuff was kind of hokey and fake, but there was one particular website, I mean, the kind of stuff that I was building was like, I had bicycle wheels in my backyard with curtain rods woven in between the spokes with magnets on it, and I was trying to get them to run. I mean, it was just pretty hilarious. Everybody's got to start somewhere. But just that inspiration, and on my research, I kept coming across one website over and over that had these diagrams of these little like motors and generators, and I didn't really understand them. At that time, I didn't even understand the difference between a transistor or a diode or anything. Knew what a resistor and an LED was, but that was about it as far as electrical components. But something kept drawing me back to this page. There was just something about it. And so, after a while, I just kind of gave up on this search, because I didn't know, what direction I was supposed to go. I didn't really have any direction, didn't know anybody who knew anything about it. And so several years later, in about 1999, I was working closely with one of my friends, longtime mentors, who actually, he was a Qigong master, but also he was an inventor. And he came into my life at the right time when I needed somebody to kind of help me understand what was going on with myself, with different experiences I was having. And so one of his longtime friends was a medical doctor, and we're looking at manufacturing red and infrared pulsed LED devices. So this was, for therapeutic purposes, and this was 20 years ago, before probably 95% of the companies out there are doing anything, with light therapy type devices. And so they were looking for an electronics engineer locally, a company that might be able to manufacture these for us. And there was some mutual attorney friends or something that recommended the doctor and my friend Roger go out to meet with somebody. And then my Qigong master friend came back and he says, yeah, I met with somebody today and we're talking about the LED project. And he had this little motor inside of this case, and it just kept itself charged up. And as soon as I heard that, I was about to flip. I was like, oh, you got to take me out there. I got to know, know more about this. So, I was probably about 27 at that time. And, I was thinking, well, if somebody around here knows anything about that kind of thing, I need to meet them. So the next day he took me out and I met John Bedini, and he was working there in Post Falls, Idaho with his brother. And at that time, the economy was really doing good. They were doing a lot of audio, amplifier sales and his holographic sound system stuff, and business was booming. And I, got to meet John, and we talked about the LED stuff. And then I saw this case sitting on top of his filing cabinet, and he had that little motor energizer in there, with these dead D-cell batteries that are corroding away, that he has to keep taped in there with some masking tape. And he just turned the rotor. Little by little, it started picking up speed. Little propellers turning, it's blowing air. The little LEDs are lighting up, and the batteries are charging up. And, after about 30 minutes, the batteries are charged up above where they were to begin with, which were basically dead. And I'm like, okay, how do I learn more about this? And he said, well, are you on the internet? I was like, well, yeah. So he gave me a website address. I went home that afternoon, and when I looked it up, it was the same website I kept going to a few years before, the one and only website that I kept getting drawn to over and over and over. And it turns out that it's owned by somebody who lives about, less than an hour from my house. And so ever since then, John always invited me over, and he said, stop by anytime you want. You can feel free, swing by, we can chat. And he kind of pointed out different things I might want to experiment with. And so that's where I kind of first was introduced to John. And, ever since then, the rest is kind of history. But one thing led to another, and, here we are 20 years later, and the conference is still going. And we've produced a lot of material, that I'm really, really happy about. It exceeded all of our expectations. And, several years ago, Peter Lindemann retired. And so pretty much this has been kind of my project that I'm moving forward with. So, I'd highly encourage anybody who wants to, learn about, not just the technologies themselves, but just kind of the nature of open system thermodynamics and these type of principles. We have a really strong library that can really walk people through, through this type of information in a way that makes it make sense to them, so that it's not some mysterious, perpetual motion, crazy idea kind of stuff. There really is a foundation in it, with a strong foundation in Nobel prize winning material, the nonlinear thermodynamics, and all these machines and motors and generators that are producing these so-called, free energy results, are all operating on these open system concepts. And so, it's kind of where we're at with it today. Well, one thing I will say is that little by little over the last 2 years, a lot of my focus has been going in the direction of manufacturing, and actually, working on getting products and devices out, based on a lot of the information that we've shared. So people can actually get their hands on them, because as you know, most people want the information, but only a small percentage of people are actually going to build any or try to do anything themselves. And most people really do just want to buy something off the shelf. And so, we're little by little by little, hopefully in about 1 year from now, we'll have maybe 6 or 7 products available,
That's fantastic.
Healing. Yeah. So.
No, congratulations with that. I mean, it just seems to be, slowly but surely, it is evolving as far as, getting solutions out there, doing it we almost have to be able to not only develop these technologies, but also have a marketing direction to go
Sure.
with getting it out there, but also accessible for people to be able to, if not build it their own, build it themselves, at least get the parts in a manner that the whole community can grow and thrive at the same time. And
Sure.
I just think it's awesome that you're able to meet John Bedini so early on. I think back in the late '90s at the time. Yeah, I think that was the only website and I think Jeff Rentz was doing a show called Sightings, and he had John Bedini on once or twice. And so it's amazing how everything has evolved since then. And now I think you kind of stole my thunder a little bit. My next question was going to be, how do you see the current alt energy space? I mean, do you see some interesting technologies on the horizon?
Can you repeat that?
I'm sorry. Yes. So how do you see, like, as far as currently, how do you see the alt energy space, the alternative energy space? Are there some interesting technologies that you see on the horizon, especially from some of the presenters that you think is promising?
Yeah. So the one that I think is one of the most promising and is also demonstrating more so-called over unity than anything I've ever seen is Jim Murray's SERPS technology, which is, stands for Switched Energy Resonant Power Supply. Several years back, Jim Murray and Paul Babcock co-presented on the secrets of Tesla's power magnification. And what it is, the demo that they showed was I think it's about 50 watts of incandescent bulbs being lit for a net loss of around 1 watt. So that doesn't mean that 1 watt is powering 50 watts of bulbs. It means 50 watts of bulbs are being powered by 50 watts of electricity. But if about 99% of that can be returned to the source, 49 watts is moving backwards through the bulb, lighting it at about 49 watts of power, then the net loss is only about 1 watt. And so it's not creating the light out of nothing. However much light you see, it is using that much electricity. But the thing is that there's a very erroneous idea that when electricity is used to power a load, whether it's inductive or even a resistive load, people commonly think, well, when the current is moving through a resistor, it's getting burned up and turning into heat. Or if you're lighting an incandescent bulb, everything being lit there is burning up the electricity. But actually, that's not true. The electricity is actually moving through it, and most of it is moving through that load without even being so-called consumed or dissipated. And so Jim Murray has found a way to take alternating current. So you got an AC sine wave, and a lot of people look at the AC sine wave as having a plus above the line component, and then when it goes past 0, there's an under the line component, so above and below. But really, it should be looked upon as a 4-quadrant sine wave, where there's a rising quarter, a falling quarter, and then inverse, rising quarter and falling quarter. So in those different quarters, in the first quarter, if you're able to put electricity out and have it go into a load and power a resistive load, like a heating element or light bulb to make light, and you're able to capture that on the falling quadrant, if you're able to take that and put it back through that load, but have it step up in voltage, for example, the generator that produced it will turn into a motor for that 1 quarter cycle, which unloads the motor that turned it. And then on the third quadrant, electricity comes back through, below the 0, and it's going to power the load again. It's captured, and then it's sent back through on that fourth quadrant, which neutralizes the load on the generator, and it unloads a prime mover on that quadrant, which means 50% of the time the generator is a generator, but 50% of the time the generator is a motor, which means the motor, the prime mover that's turning that generator sees no net load, which means that was a solid state version, so it's hard for people to see, oh, well, how do I know what circuitry is doing what, and what's really being drawn from the wall. But later on, they scaled that up and used one of these old, like an Onan generator, one of these old school generators that actually make good sine waves, because if you get these generators from like Harbor Freight or whatever, there's so much distortion, and it's not even a sine wave anymore, and it's really detrimental to electronic devices to even run, like, computers or, anything on that kind of, so-called dirty sine wave. But on these old generators, for this effect, you really need a good pure sine wave. And what happened was they took a certain amount of gas in a graduated little tube, so you know how many, cc's or whatever you have, and then you just run it on idle to see how long that generator is going to run. Then when you hook up the SERPS circuit and you connect about 1,500 watts of bulbs to it, the motor kind of, that kind of goes up and down a little bit. So this is a gas generator, so you got a finite quantity of fuel in that little tube. It's lighting 1,500 watts of bulbs, but the engine is idling, which means it's lighting 1,500 watts of bulbs, and it will last just as long as it did when there was no load attached, showing conclusively and indisputably that 100% of all the load has been neutralized. So that's one of the most profound things that I know of that's legitimate. That Jim is funded, and he's recently moved to Canada not too long ago, maybe about a year ago, within the last year or so, and has set up shop there, and he has a good team of people that they're looking at moving all this forward. And so if I put my money on one technology that I've personally seen, that's it. There's others, but just the amount of so-called over unity that's there is just astonishing. It's nobody can tell me it's not real.
Yeah. That's just fantastic. It just seems like you said, it's all about everything that we're talking about is dealing with open systems. And when you look at it like that, I mean, nothing's being violated. If someone wants to try to go conventional, even that, when you look at an open system, a lot of these concepts need to be expanded, and it doesn't actually apply.
Hi, I'm James from the Clean Energy Academy, coming to you here from my QEG lab in the United States.
Hi, I'm Taban from the Clean Energy Academy, and I'm coming to you live from our lab in Morocco.
The Clean Energy Academy is a member-only community that is the home of the QEG and Mini QEG.
This is the only platform of its kind in the controversial industry of energy inventions that allows for safe sharing of ideas in a troll-free environment.
The Academy holds a tremendous amount of in-depth technical information, reports, schematics, and engineering data based around the co-development of open-source alternative energy devices.
You can learn more about our QEG project by visiting our website, cleanenergyacademy.com, or by watching our documentary film, Chasing Tesla, which also can be found on our website.
Twice a month we hold live calls that cover the latest updates on our QEG project work, and also include special guest speakers and presentations on related energy topics.
Members get invites to our live calls and archives. Non-members can purchase archives of our calls at our online shop.
Members also get access to our project reports and our builders forums.
These forums include documentation around testing results, experimentation descriptions, and detailed project explanations.
We also have a wide selection of members-only video galleries that feature project footage that you won't find anywhere else.
We have some additional sign-on bonus features and low-cost monthly membership plans for instant access, now available at the link below.
Again, click the link below for more information on where you can get archives of our live calls and access to all the benefits of being a member of the Clean Energy Academy.
So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you join the exciting co-development work at the Clean Energy Academy. In an open system. Yeah, that's great. So I'm gonna take a bit of a tangent, but then we're gonna come back to the plasma ignition. But speaking of open systems, being able to use the environment as a means of tapping into the source of energy has far wide-reaching implications, especially in the field of health and in the field of epigenetics. And one of the things I just kind of want to touch on that we can discuss a little bit that I know we find pretty interesting. We heard you in a recent interview when you were talking about a little bit about how this form of energy can be used to literally heal the planet. And if you want to, I want to get into this topic of the Ebner effect. and in its ability to literally fix things that are basically causing problems, like with GMOs and things. If you want to talk a little bit about that. And while you're talking, I'm going to share my screen to show some of the things, because it happens to be the kind of thing that we're into with some of the orgone research. So if you want to talk a little about the Ebner effect.
Yeah, and we're going to have Dr. James DeMayo there, which is pretty exciting. I've wanted to meet him in person for years. So, talking about the orgone. But so yeah, the Ebner effect. Yes, I think that was last year. I did a presentation, Electro-Biohacking. And can you hear this okay?
Yes, I hear you loud and clear. Yeah, please continue.
Okay. And so, I guess you can say the umbrella category of this science is called electroculture, which basically means you're using electricity to enhance the growth of plants and crops and so forth. And it goes way back to nearly 300 years. Literally, they had electrostatic generators that were putting out a high voltage electrostatic field. No current it's just like capacitor plates, basically. And when even animals like cats and dogs they would experiment with, and plants, they actually grew faster and stronger being exposed to a high voltage field than without. So up until the 1980s or so, pretty much all electroculture that was ever used using electricity to stimulate plant growth has always pretty much kind of been the same. There has really not been much of a quantum leap in the entire electroculture field until I believe it's a Swiss chemical company, Ciba-Geigy, which is now a part of Novartis for a long time. Guido Ebner and Heinrich Schultz, I believe might have been his partner's name. And what Ebner was doing was he was looking at using electricity, and one of the projects he was working on was a type of pacemaker that could be worn externally around the wrist like a watch. And so some of the experiments he was doing was taking cells, and he would deprive them of light, nutrients, water, and so, basically just depriving the cells as much as possible. But as long as they were exposed to an electrostatic field, they continued to thrive. And so one thing led to another, and pretty soon they're using high voltage on seeds or spores while they're germinating, and also fish eggs while they're after they've been fertilized. And the results are absolutely astonishing. As you see on the screen here, without SEF, I think that's static electric field, I believe is what that stands for. And on the left side, you see the regular serrated type of fern, which is whatever most people are familiar with. There's bracken ferns and a whole bunch of different kind of ferns, but for the most part, they're all pretty similar. And on the right, what you see with the static electric field, while the spores are germinated, is that it grew a fern, which there's only fossil evidence for because they've been extinct for about 1.5 million years. So it's like Jurassic Park technology, but without modifying the genetics. And so that term you used, epigenetics, is basically changing or altering the genetic expression, but without genetic modification. And so all the information to do this is already lying dormant within the genetics of the plant or the animal, for example. And when being exposed to very specific voltage ranges, electrostatic fields, at the right voltage levels, and what separates this from electroculture in general is that the voltage levels that they were doing are in the many thousands of volts per centimeter versus, maybe 1,000 volts over one entire meter. So we're talking, we're operating at different orders of magnitude of volts per centimeter. And what happens is that it's giving the electrostatic potential to the genetics to be able to tap these dormant genes in whatever way, anybody's guess is as good as mine. But what you see, for example, here's a trout. On the left side is a typical kind of trout. I don't know exactly what kind it is, but when they took these eggs and they laid them and they fertilized them and put them between two capacitor plates at a fairly high voltage per centimeter, the hatch rate went something like around maybe 50% hatch rate up to about 9. I think I see their survival rate 95%, which is quite an increase on its own. But what you see on the right is that the trout grew, I don't know, roughly 30% bigger, 30% faster, and on the exact same diet as the controls. And they were more hardy swimmers, more aggressive. But what you see on the picture on the right is this little hook coming out from its lower jaw. That's called a salmon hook. There's another name for it. I don't recall. But that hook coming off from under the jaw has not been seen on that type of trout for over 150 years because they've been extinct. So this is some pretty trippy science here, but the implications are vast. So what it does is, this is on the trout right there. They've treated corn were able to grow corn that had 4 to 12 ears of corn per plant. 4 ears is crazy itself. Typically, I guess corn will sometimes grow a second ear, but it's not really sold on the market because they're kind of underdeveloped and are kind of considered useless. The only corn plants that grow multiple corns are the little baby corns, which are used for salads. It actually is kind of a real corn, but it's very, very expensive in comparison. And so, everybody has their own opinions about ethanol. But however, if you have, if you're able to grow even 2 full-size ears of corn per plant, you just doubled your ethanol production per acre. That's huge, and if you're talking about 4 corn, 400% increase, I mean, it's just astronomical what the implications are, for this. And, suddenly it makes it look like, ethanol from corn, can be a good idea because that's a good use of the land if you're able to multiply it by hundreds of percent. And so that's a little, that's a little bit about it. The presentation I gave, there is a book called The Primal Code. It's in German. And that was released by, I don't recall who the author was, but I know that I believe Ebner's son is still kind of active, kind of promoting this throughout Germany and the rest of Europe. I don't know how much traction he's getting, but I know for a while he was actually selling these little electrostatic seed treatment devices, which would be used for like maybe the home gardener or, somebody that just wants to experiment with it. And I don't think he's offering those anymore, but I have seen video clips of him giving lectures on this technology. And so, none of this is, any of my discovery. I just wanted the information to be available and for people to know about it. And I wanted to put it on the map in the English speaking world because everybody needs to know about it. The implications are too profound. Siba Geigy wound up squashing the entire program. And in my presentation, I have an excerpt from one of their business meetings or whatever. And what it comes down to is that it jeopardizes their renewable income stream. And it's not in their best interest to have a technology that makes the chemicals that they're producing obsolete, for pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, whatever. And so, none of it's conspiracy theory. It's just business. No business like that wants to jeopardize their renewable, their recurring income stream. Not that I blame them, but I mean, obviously we're in times that we kind of need these type of technologies. And I believe this is all public domain. People can look up the patents. I've experimented with it myself, not that much because I've been so busy with the Lakovsky multi-wave oscillator project. But you can see a picture of this little electrostatic device that I have these little tiny frying pans turned upside down with these little discs, to create a high voltage field up to about 10,000 volts per centimeter if I want. And I did get faster growing results with some sprouts. I actually did that before the conference. I had the before and the control and the experiment, and I had those in a box in these little dishes. And when they got brought out to the conference, somebody stacked it in the back behind the projector screen somewhere, and they all dried out by the time my presentation was there. So I didn't even want to bring up that I even tried to do anything with it. That's not showing the change in genetic expression because there wasn't enough time for them to grow to fruit to see what even happens to them. But I did get faster growth of those sprouts compared to the control. But to do this, obviously you have to go through the fruiting cycle and see what even happens. And so one thing I learned later on was that the voltage ranges are a little bit more specific per plant, and it's not as simple as just the general voltage range that they try to indicate in their patents, which, obviously they probably want to keep that kind of proprietary. But I did learn that there are very specific voltage ranges for, specific seeds. And so that's going to take a lot of trial and error to work all that out. But all the information necessary to put somebody on the right track is in that presentation for sure. So.
Yeah, well, that's very fascinating, Aaron. It just seems like the best solutions, especially if it's within the public domain, aren't going to be publicized because it bypasses the traditional business method or way of being able to make a profit. But I mean, like you said, I mean, to think that for a lot of farmers who look at, well, especially with the weather now, crop losses and things like that, the solution could be a solar-powered Van de Graaff generator that applies the right electric field strength to a tray that has seeds in it as a solution to basically hit the reset button on the genetics of those seeds to improve plant strength and yield.
Sure.
And to think that such a simple solution, or a solution could be so simple, it is amazing, and I find it very very interesting.
And it's inexpensive.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt quickly? I promised I wasn't going to do this, but I'll just this one time. What hit me so deeply about what you were just talking about is that it seems like the development of this particular technology, the understanding, would make GMOs obsolete.
Sure.
It's huge. I just wanted to say, do you think that's true, Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, if you look at all the claims for GMO, it doesn't hold up to the claims. It's just a bad idea all the way around. And I'm glad that Monsanto has taken a pounding around the world. I mean, there's different countries are banning GMO crops. So Monsanto's taking it pretty hard. Bayer bought them out, and Bayer owns Monsanto, and it's not looking good for them right now. It's just a matter of time, little by little by little. They do have a lot of power. They have a lot of control within the government, regardless of whose administration. Doesn't matter, Democratic, Republican, whatever. You have Monsanto people and attorneys and stuff in these revolving door kind of positions and stuff, and a little bit scary. But people are just going to have to take things on for themselves and experiment and do these kind of things, because they're not going to be available like at Walmart or wherever anybody is shopping. It's it's really going to be a grassroots movement from bottom up. But yeah, it absolutely will obsolete the entire concept of GMO. Plus, it's a lot safer. You're not tampering with the gene pool. One of the evidences of that is that, for example, when they treated the spores and it grew a fern that doesn't even have serrated leaves, it's just one of these, elongated type of leaves without the serrations, extinct for 1.5 million years. Okay, so they grow that fern, and then when they get the spores and they grow it from there to get a second generation, third and fourth, by about 4 or 5 generations, it's already reverted back to a normal fern. So that's showing that you have not tampered with the genetics and that the effect is not long-term. And so there's no permanent change in it. So,
but yes, it's like there's no permanent change, but at the same time, when it reverts back to like the ancient fern with those genetics, it gives you a healthier plant, and you're not having to add any chemicals to it. You can literally have a technology that's based on like a solar panel running the electrostatic generator to
right.
hit that reset button again for the next generation of seeds that start to revert to the
that's possible to maybe keep it going once you have those and retreat it. Sure. Look at the wheat. 4 weeks from planting it to harvest. 4 weeks for wheat is like, that's completely insane. It was smaller, but it had more, I guess, kernels or whatever you call it per grain. And and it's super wheat, and I believe it's more more nutritious, more nutritionally dense. And but I mean, if you can do a crop in 4 to 6 weeks, I mean, you could do multiple crops per year. That completely would change the entire industry, and don't need this, any kind of GMO grain or any of those kind of things. So they called it super wheat, but just thinking planting it to harvesting in 4 weeks, that's like crazy fast. The implications are huge.
Well, that's fantastic, and I know we'll probably have to talk about this again in another call. But yeah, that's very fascinating. Again, it's just taking things that are already in the environment and applying it in the correct way, and we're able to basically literally heal this planet. And so yeah, so now we're going to just go back into the. We're going to talk about the plasma ignition system, and so. Now, you're an avid researcher in this. I started looking at even going back to 2008 with some of the stuff you put on YouTube to get an idea on your thinking behind it. This ignition system, what got you interested in this technology originally?
So I've always kind of tinkered on cars ever since I was in high school. Before my dad went into the military, he was a master mechanic, and my mom's dad was a master mechanic, before he went into the Army back in World War II. My mom, she even worked on her own cars. She had an old 60-something Camaro right out of high school, and, was into, racing and that kind of stuff. And so I've always looked at, different ignition technologies, and honestly, out of anything that's ever been there since the original, Tesla basically started the basic Tesla coil style ignition system, known as a Kettering ignition system. I guess he may have refined it a little bit. And ever since then, any kind of ignition system that's been out there, whether it's capacitive discharge ignition, which means putting a capacitor of a few hundred volts to the input of an ignition coil to get a corresponding step up, compared to just 12 volts from the battery. It's still just nothing more than a glorified spark. It's maybe a little bit more beefier, but it's still the same type of spark. So in about early 2008, something like that, somebody kept messaging me at Energetic Forum, and that's when Energetic Forum was only, I don't know, maybe 2 years old or something, 2 or 3 years old. And somebody said, yeah, there's somebody working on this ignition stuff I think you might want to take a look at. And finally, after about 2 weeks of him repeatedly contacting me, I finally went to another website to look at what they were talking about, and I saw it, and I instantly knew what they were doing. I saw this little plasma discharge at the spark gap that looked like this little white ball that was very, very fast, very, very loud, very, very powerful, and with not that much energy going into it. So it's not necessarily an energy gain, but it's a power gain. Basically just meaning you're taking all that stored potential in a capacitor and you're able to discharge it in a super, super small period of time. And that's a power increase. And so when I looked at the circuit, I instantly concluded that it's like a miniature version of the so-called gray tube. And so there was somebody named E.V. Gray, Edwin Gray, who had this so-called gray motor with these gray tubes, which were this switching kind of tube, which was kind of like a high voltage transistor almost, you could say, with the spark gap. And it's kind of been known as, thought to be one of the holy grails of electricity. Nobody's ever really fully replicated it. There's a lot of speculation what it's about, but there's about 3 different main things with it. And so going back to the early 2000s, in about 2001 or so, Peter Lindemann wrote a book called The Free Energy Secrets of Cold Electricity. And that was basically his thesis of how he believed the Ed Gray motor worked. There's a lot of good information in there, and if it wasn't for Peter's work there, most people wouldn't know about it. So essentially, he put it on the map. And, there's more to it than Peter originally thought, but the point is that, that got people moving in the right direction. So shortly after Peter came out with his book, John Bedini released his diagrams from when him and his partner back then, Ron Cole, went and actually met with Gray, saw the motor demonstrations, and they got to diagram out how the entire motor was put together. And on these diagrams, which were originally released at online at KeelyNet, which was Jerry Decker's website way back. He had passed away in the last few years, but I think that website's still up. But in any case, John Bedini's drawings of the so-called Gray tube showed a tube which had a high voltage rod where like a 4 or 5,000 volt capacitor positive was sitting on, and then there was a gap, and then there was another rod that it jumped to. Well, on the other rod that it jumped to, there was a low voltage source of a couple batteries, like 24 volt lead acid battery bank, where the positive went through a diode, or like a thyristor, some type of tube triggered diode. So the positive was going to a positive. And so, you know, people should really get out of the mindset of polarity, because polarity doesn't really matter. It's potential difference. So you can have a high voltage positive jump to a low voltage positive as long as they have a common ground, because that positive is still a lower potential for the high voltage to jump to. And what happened was the high voltage would be triggered to jump into that low voltage rod. The diode would shut off, and that big massive discharge has nowhere to go except over to these grids, which receive the so-called radiant energy explosion, and that goes and it powers the inductor and the motor. Okay, well, when John released those diagrams, his own diagrams, everybody is saying, oh, John drew the diode the wrong way, because how can you have a positive voltage jump into a diode in opposition? But the thing is, for me, since I didn't have the training, I didn't know that that was wrong, and that was, in fact, the only thing that ever did make sense to me. Was that, you know, a diode is not a blocking diode until, you know, you actually have that reverse voltage to turn it off. Before then, it's a completely open circuit. It's a complete path to ground. So the high voltage jumps into the diode, it shuts off, and when it shuts off, it can't go there anymore. But before it's shut off, it's a complete open path. So of course you can have a positive jump into that. Well, anyway, when you look at these, those diagrams were always in my mind, and I did it, you know, my own little experiments and stuff. And essentially that's what that plasma ignition was. And so I could see that they did not understand what they were really looking at. They thought that the plasma effect came from this inverter that was plugged into the wall. And when I saw it, one of the first things I did was an experiment to show that that plasma effect was pretty much all because of what was in the capacitor, and it didn't have anything to do with the capacitor being charged by this inverter. And so, so if I'm looking at this diagram, is this a diagram that you drew?
Yeah, I just drew it based on, I was going to share some of the other diagrams, but not too much. Obviously, you know, people are interested in this technology. They can,
yeah.
I'm going to have some links from the Fringe Energy website, but also on your site with that talks about the package for the ignition secrets. But yeah, this was kind of like a high level idea. Is this correct? Based on the different schematic stuff you're working on, is the idea, like you said, was to have the high voltage source. You have kind of like this unidirectional high voltage source going one way, but when it hits the diode, it causes this water hammer type effect. You know, the one that has high current, low voltage source, and has nowhere to go but down through the gap. But while it's doing it, it's providing a bridge for the low voltage, high current to also go through. Thus,
exactly
that explosion.
Yeah.
In your technology.
Right. And just touching on that gray motor stuff just real quick, is on my YouTube channel, if you search for the plasma stuff, I have one video where I do a whiteboard comparison between the gray motor, so-called gray tube diagram, and then the plasma ignition, so everybody can see without a shadow of a doubt that they're mirror image, 100% identical analogies of each other. So to make it simple, you know, even without getting into all the water hammer effect and that kind of stuff, essentially, if you look at this diagram here that you have, let's just say on the left side, this is like a ignition coil. Okay, you have a AC going into it, but in any case, it doesn't matter. Let's just say that the long, you know, the 4 coils in series, let's just say that's the output of a like an auto transformer coil. typical black body canister ignition coil. And so what happens is when the ignition coil is triggered, you get a spark going over the gap. And so what I'm able to do is get a couple 100-volt capacitor to jump the same gap that it normally takes, maybe about 4,000 or 5,000 volts to jump. Typically it's thought maybe between 3,500 and 4,500 volts is what's needed to jump like maybe 1 millimeter gap, in open air, maybe on average. So say around maybe 4,000 volts. So if it takes 4,000 volts to jump a 1 millimeter gap, how can I make a capacitor of maybe 400 volts, 1/10 of the necessary voltage, jump that gap? So it's very, very simple. So what happens is first, the ignition coil discharges a spark over the gap, and when it does, it ionizes that gap, and the ionization means it's very positively charged, and what that means is that it's lacking electrons, which means to balance itself out, it's going to seek and it's trying to pull electrons to it to go back to a neutral state, I guess you could say. And so as soon as you have that spark at that gap, it's no longer a gap. That ionization is very conductive, which means there's now a path that low voltage can jump across. So on the right side, you have a capacitor sitting right there with the plus sign right above it. And let's say that capacitor is charged up to 400 volts. And let's say it's maybe 2, 3, 4 microfarads. So pretty small, and that's typically what would be in a automobile performance ignition system, like a CDI system, capacitive discharge ignition. They'll be about 400 to 500 volts at 2 to 5 microfarads, depending. So if that capacitor is charged to, say, 400 volts, the very moment that the high voltage ignition coil makes a spark over the gap, that capacitor is going to discharge over it. And it's not what people would expect. What happens is that evidently what's happening is just about all the resistance in that circuit disappears, and the cap is able to discharge almost instantaneously. So typically, if you have a capacitor and you discharge it, it's going to kind of discharge on a curve. So let's see, I can see my little window there. So if you have a capacitor discharging, I guess go like this, and let's say, up and down is the voltage, left and right is the time. Let's say this bar, I guess we'll use that bar right there as the up and down voltage, and then the horizontal is time. Well, if the cap is charged, say 0, 100, 200, 300, 400 volts, and when it discharges, it's going to kind of discharge on this little slope like this over time. It's not instantaneous, because as the capacitor discharges, there's these different resistances and impedances it has to kind of overcome in order for it to discharge all of its potential. And so it's anything but instantaneous. It takes time to discharge. Yeah. Well, what this effect is as soon as that high voltage spark is there and that cap discharges, it discharges almost straight down in a straight line. Not perfectly, but very, very close, which means all this time that it took disappeared, and it got compressed into this much time. So if you have, 1 volt times 1 amp is 1 watt. 1 watt over 1 second is the same as 1 joule second. But if you take that 1 joule of potential energy and you discharge it in a half a second, suddenly you have 2 watts. Or if you take that 1 joule of potential energy and you discharge it in 1/10 of a second, you have 10 watts for that 1/10 of a second. So that's, energy versus power. Power is just energy being discharged in a shorter period of time. So people who don't, if anybody listening to this doesn't really have a firm grasp on energy versus potential, let's look at, if you walk up to a window and you take a hammer and you just tap on that window 1 time, you can do it soft enough where you won't break it. If you do it 2 times, soft enough you won't break it. You could do that 10 times in a row and the window's not going to break. However, if you took all that energy that you dissipated in all 10 taps and you put it in 1 single tap, you're going to shatter that glass to pieces. It's the same amount of energy, but that's an increase in power, and the results are a lot different. A lot of conventional engineers and physicists, they're always going to argue, well, it's just the same amount of energy anyway, even if it's at a higher power, so there's not going to be any difference. But the thing is that was the whole world of Tesla's world. Was he was all about amplifying power, these impulses that happen in a very short period of time. And so, you know, you're taking those 10 taps, same energy, but if you discharge it really fast in one tap, it's a whole world of difference, and the results are very, very different, even though it's the same amount of energy. If you ever see Bruce Lee, you know, you can punch somebody, you know, like a normal punch, and it'll have a certain amount of damage.
Yeah.
But Bruce Lee always does this 2-inch, this little like 1-inch punch where he actually has his hand, you know, it's almost not even an inch away. He's actually in contact, and his just fingertip is just touching, and all he does is just like this, and the person goes flying back 20 feet, landing on their butt. It's because he took all that energy and he discharged it in a very, very short period of time. And even though it's the same energy as punching someone normal, the results are vastly different because he compressed all that energy into one little fraction of a second, and that person just goes flying across the room. So that's amplification of power using the same amount of energy. And so in this circuit, when we look on a scope and we see that capacitor discharges really fast down on a straight line instead of taking all the time, the results are very different, and it's no longer a spark. Because when you look at that little plasma discharge at the gap, it's not just a glorified little spark with a few extra streamers. That's still just a normal spark. So there's like a plasmoid, which is this little bright ball of light, like a little microscopic little ball of sunshine there that's super, super bright and is super, super loud. And with increasing the amount of capacitance that I have sitting like on the bench test, not that you want to put this in an engine because it'll break apart the spark plug material and it would just damage your engine, but on open bench tests, camera just went different there. I see somebody with the remote control at their hand.
Sorry, that's me.
Hi, Ron. I see you loud and clear, Aaron, and hear you loud and clear. Please proceed.
Somebody on the couch enjoying a game or something. So the plasma discharge, I got it big enough where I was getting like bigger than golf ball size explosions coming off of the tip of a spark plug. It was so bright, you literally have to have sunglasses because it's blinding, and it's so loud you have to have hearing protection. When my garage door was open, you can hear it 2 blocks down the street. Bam, bam, bam. I mean, it's crazy. And when you spray water on it, just regular misting tap water on it, it just goes to a whole nother level. It gets even brighter, louder. And if you saw some of the booster cap video demos, you can see these little explosions coming off the spark plug. Like if you go to the website for the video presentation, there's a couple little pictures, stills that were very hard to catch because it's so fast. It's hard to catch on a camera, and it's so loud. Cameras don't really do it justice. It has to be right there in front of your face to really get exactly what's going on there.
And I encourage everyone who's listening to this to please go on, well, I know on your YouTube channel, I think you still might have that. It's the 2012, it's the ESTC 2012 conference where you show a demonstration of the unit with Linderman.
Okay.
And I think you also have it on the eMedia Press website as well, where you're showing, you got the same video. I encourage everyone to look at it because you basically demo just with the CDI, just a spark, and then
Right.
of course having the diode connected, which seemingly looks like it's in reverse, and then you see the effect, and then you spray some water on it, and it's even more powerful.
Right.
I see, it's amazing. Now, a question I had about that is that high voltage line that has the spark gap, that entire line. What is happening there? Is there an overlap of both the high voltage low current and the high current low voltage going through at the same time on that line?
Yes.
Like the wire, the spark gap in the wire is having overlapping of signals. Is that what's happening?
Right. So as the high voltage spark goes, it's high voltage, very low current, and then you're mixing low voltage with high current. And so when you mix high voltage, low current, and low voltage, high current, interesting things happen. Can you create a synthetic high current? And if you multiply those, what kind of wattage are you getting? Okay, does it actually work that way? It just may. I don't know. It's very interesting, but I'll tell you this. Kind of the conclusion I came to, which I'm always open to change it, you know, based on whatever information seems to make the most sense at the time, is that when you have that high voltage, voltage is like a, you know, a pressure, and low voltage is low pressure, high voltage is high pressure. Also, you know, voltage or a negative voltage could also act like a suction. Or if you have a positive voltage, it's like a suction for electron current, because they're going to pull each other, or the positive potential is going to pull on the current. And so what happens is, why does the capacitor discharge so fast? I have a couple ideas why. Some of my experiments show me that I'm kind of on the right direction. But what happens is, if all that time is able to disappear, and that cap can't discharge, if you just short circuit it, it's going to discharge slower than it does traveling over an entire circuit, jumping that gap. And so you can take the cap with the same joules of potential and you can completely short it. You don't get anything even close, or not even remotely close to that plasma discharge. And so you know, when a spark is jumping a gap gap is considered a negative resistor anyway. Just like some, you know, fluorescent light tubes and stuff are considered to be sort of like negative resistors. If you have the high voltage potential coming over one part of the gap, and you have electrons moving from the negative towards the positive, they actually accelerate, right? So the electrons are actually accelerating and moving faster than they were in the gap than they were over the surface of the wire. So why is it accelerating? Well, that's known as a negative resistance effect. And typically in a spark gap, it's really only accepted that that negative resistance effect, where that electron current is accelerating over the gap, only happens at the gap. And so if that's the case, then why does the capacitor discharge when it's going over the entire circuit, which indicates that that resistance in the entire path of that capacitor is not only accelerating over the gap, but that current has to be moving from the capacitor over the wire at an accelerated rate. So what causes that? Well, normally that current's going to be associated with a couple hundred volts, you know, of potential with that capacitor. And the tiny bit of current on an ignition coil is associated with that, you know, 15,000 volts, 30,000 volts, whatever that voltage happens to be. But if you have, let's just say it's 15,000 volts, and you have the current from the capacitor, you got 15,000 volts pulling and sucking on that current from the capacitor over that line like a vacuum cleaner, sucking it up. And that's what I believe is the effect of it removing all that resistance, is that that high voltage is like a vacuum, pulling a vacuum on that entire path to the current for the capacitor, and is essentially removing that resistance. And that's why the capacitor can discharge at virtually, you know, with almost no resistance. And that's why it happens so fast. You know, and there's, I have the intention of doing a series of experiments to actually, you know, prove that indisputably. But what I'm looking at is, you know, there's different so-called violations of Ohm's law, but really there's not. You know, there's negative resistance zones in transistors where you can start increasing the voltage and the current actually drops down in a very narrow window, like a MJL 21194, a 2N2222 transistor, and there's a few other common off-the-shelf transistors. They have these little zones that you increase the voltage, but the current drops, known as that's a little negative resistance zone. There's other types of things that, you know, supposedly violate Ohm's law, but really different things are kind of where Ohm's law doesn't really apply. But this is a situation where if it can be shown that that resistance is being removed on that circuit and that current is being accelerated from the capacitor, which it looks like it is, that is an absolute violation of Ohm's law outright, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And that's something that I'm kind of excited to actually, you know, prove out, you know, with the right people helping me, so they can make sure that everything is done proper. But it is an interesting effect. The implications are astronomical. And But here's where my plasma ignition differs from other people's experiments. So I didn't invent that form of plasma discharge. I'll just be upfront about that. It's been around since possibly maybe the 60s or 70s. I know that NASA, they had a patent on this. I think it was Jet Propulsion Laboratories was involved in it. Almost every automobile and spark plug manufacturer has patents on the plasma ignition. Princeton University has patents on it. You name it. The thing about it is they're just, you know, when the ignition coil is charged and makes a spark over a gap, it's just, there's an input and the output of the ignition coil. So the primary is the input, and energy has to go there, and it usually comes from a battery being pulsed to the primary through a so-called igniter. Points are closing and opening on a mechanical distributor. There's different, you know, mechanical and electronic ways to send a pulse from the battery, which will be, I don't know, 12.5 volts, 13 volts or so with the alternator running, going into the ignition coil. Then you have a proportional, you know, step up depending on the windings, and you're going to get that spark at the gap. So that is a conventionally powered ignition coil that's not enhanced by anything else. And the antiquated way of doing the plasma was to have a completely separate power supply that would charge a capacitor, where the plus of that capacitor goes through a diode to the top of the spark plug. So when the ignition coil fires, it's not going into the capacitor, it's actually going over the gap, because that diode is going to shut it off. High voltage spark happens, and then that capacitor will discharge over the gap. So what makes my system unique, and what kind of went against the grain of what everybody thought to be impossible, is that I can do it with any off-the-shelf CDI unit. Yes, it is a capacitor charging module, but the thing is I can simultaneously use that capacitor as the input to the ignition coil to get even a stronger spark to initiate that spark. Because if the capacitor is charged to, say, I don't know, 450 volts, and as soon as that capacitor is dumped to the primary ignition coil, it's going to be a lot stronger spark than if it's just powered by the battery at a 13 volts or whatever it happens to be. Well, the conventional thinking is, well, as soon as that capacitor goes to the primary of the ignition coil, that all that potential is used up, so there's nothing left to jump the gap. If you wanted to use the capacitor as both the power source to charge the ignition coil, but simultaneously act as the low voltage source, so that that capacitor will jump the gap when it's when the spark is there.
Yeah.
But that's in fact what my method is, and why it is unique. And nobody thought it was possible, because their thinking wouldn't let them go there, because it's automatically assumed that, well, the capacitor is going to be discharged when it goes to the ignition coil. But what I found is almost nothing from the capacitor goes to the ignition coil, just a tiny little blip. And as soon as that spark is made, majority of what's left in that cap will then go through a diode and then jump the gap. And so what it makes possible is for this to be done at a very low cost. Yeah. Because there's some companies that are trying to do the antiquated method, and you're going to pay, you know, $500 to $1,000 for these cap chargers and these diodes and stuff. But my favorite method so far is I bought a MSD. Mm-hmm. So CDI is the traditional one. That means you have a capacitor charged to a certain voltage and capacitance, and when the ignition coil needs to fire, that capacitor will discharge one single time to the ignition coil, and you'll get one spark one time when you need it on the ignition cycle. What MSD is that's really kind of a trademark name by a company, but it means multiple spark discharge, which means it has an even more robust cap charging circuit that will charge the capacitor. And when you need to fire a spark at the gap, that capacitor will discharge to the ignition coil to make a spark, and it will do it over and over and over, like 6 or 7 times at low RPM, which means instead of having a spark one time on ignition cycle, it's actually going like a little machine gun. It's just going off super, super fast. And so you have the spark that's going to exist there for a longer period of time, for more, you know, more angle on that cycle to burn more fuel. And so what I've done, you can buy a budget MSD unit called a Street Fire unit for about $155 delivered on Amazon or, you know, wherever. And as long as you can hook that up to whatever engine, then all you have to do is add a high voltage diode from the positive of the ignition coil, because that's what's connected to the cap positive inside the module, to each spark plug, all 4 spark plugs, and then suddenly you have a plasma ignition system for nothing more than $150 ignition module. You can buy these high voltage diodes. I bought them in bulk from Hong Kong over eBay for like $2.50 a piece, and with the extra miscellaneous cable and stuff, you're talking for less than $200. You got a plasma ignition system that actually works. You know, it's easier to do on the older cars with the, you know, mechanical rotating distributor, you know, whether it's mechanical points or electronic ignition. You can do it on some of the newer cars. It's a little bit more of a challenge, but in any case, this method, being able to use a regular off-the-shelf CDI, kind of changes the game, and it essentially obsoletes millions and millions of dollars in patents owned by all these automobile manufacturers, spark plug companies, and you name it. And it puts it in the hands of the average tinkerer to be able to put this on their car and benefit from it.
Hi, I'm James from the Clean Energy Academy, coming to you here from my QEG lab in the United States.
Hi, I'm Taban from the Clean Energy Academy, and I'm coming to you live from our lab in Morocco.
The Clean Energy Academy is a member-only community that is the home of the QEG and Mini QEG.
This is the only platform of its kind in the controversial industry of energy inventions that allows for safe sharing of ideas in a troll-free environment.
The Academy holds a tremendous amount of in-depth technical information, reports, schematics, and engineering data based around the co-development of open-source alternative energy devices.
You can learn more about our QEG project by visiting our website, cleanenergyacademy.com, or by watching our documentary film, Chasing Tesla, which also can be found on our website.
Twice a month we hold live calls that cover the latest updates on our QEG project work, and also include special guest speakers and presentations on related energy topics.
Members get invites to our live calls and archives. Non-members can purchase archives of our calls at our online shop.
Members also get access to our project reports and our builders forums.
These forums include documentation around testing results, experimentation descriptions, and detailed project explanations.
We also have a wide selection of members-only video galleries that feature project footage that you won't find anywhere else.
We have some additional sign-on bonus features and low-cost monthly membership plans for instant access, now available at the link below.
Again, click the link below for more information on where you can get archives of our live calls and access to all the benefits of being a member of the Clean Energy Academy.
So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you join the exciting co-development work at the Clean Energy Academy.
So,
well, that's absolutely fantastic, Aaron. And I want to make sure I understand this. When you charge that capacitor so you can discharge it across the primary of the ignition coil, does it need to be isolated from the battery charging that capacitor, or could you have the battery connected at the same time, like to the capacitor? Does the capacitor need to be, isolated from the battery that's charging it up?
Yeah, I believe in the circuit inside. I think the windings that are used, everything is so miniaturized with all these, transformer core technology, which you're familiar with. It makes all the difference in the world. Then get these things, super, super tiny. I don't know if you can still hear me. My screen on the screen is kind of lagging right there.
But I hear loud and clear.
Okay, so
I'll turn off my video and make the bandwidth a bit better. There you go.
So I think that inside the modules, the capacitor is isolated from the battery anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no consideration really has to be paid to that. So if somebody wants to put this on a car, as long as there's a capacitive discharge system available for their particular engine, then all they have to do is add the high voltage diodes from the positive of the ignition coil to each spark plug, and they automatically have it. Okay. There are a few exceptions. My 98 Legacy GT wagon, that's got a Subaru Boxer engine in it, and so it has a coil pack instead of a regular single ignition coil. And what that means is it's horizontally opposed pistons. That's why they call it a boxer engine, because it's like the two pistons are kind of like boxing each other. But the voltage on the coil is different. On two, like spark plug number 1 and 3 are different from number 2 and 4. I think 1 and 3 are positive and 2 and 4 are negative. And what happens is when one fires, it has to go through the body of the engine, ground, and from the ground up through the center of the opposite spark plug back to itself, and that's how it closes a loop. It's called a wasted spark ignition system with that kind of coil pack, because when one of the spark plugs fire on the ignition cycle, I think the other one is firing on the exhaust cycle, and it's called wasted spark ignition because it's a spark that's essentially wasted. And so, you know, spark plugs will wear out twice as quick because they're firing twice as often as they actually have to. Well, with this arrangement, being that the high voltage polarity is different, you can't just take the positive of the ignition coil and go to the top of each spark plug because you have all these polarity issues. But in the Ignition Secrets package, I think the year after I did that initial presentation, 1 or 2 years after, I did a presentation on specific for wasted spark ignition systems, and I cracked the method on how to actually do it on a wasted spark ignition system. And that goes into a lot of details on how I arranged the coils and this and that to get around that. But I was able to make it work on my 98 Legacy GT wagon. And the other difficulty some people might have is that there's coil on plugs, which means right on top of the spark plug is a tiny ignition coil dedicated to each spark plug, which, you know, there's benefits to it that you don't have all these cable losses and you name it. So conceptually it can be a lot more efficient. But the thing is you have to be able to get that diode to go underneath that boot, and it might arc over to the body. And so at some point when I have time, I'd like to look into having custom coil on plugs manufactured where the high voltage diode is actually built inside of it in one unit. Recently, I bought a 2006 Subaru XT wagon. It's a 5-speed, it's turbocharged. I think 2006 to 2000, I think in 2009, Subaru stopped putting turbos on the wagon. Plus, I don't like the look of the new cars anyway. They're all kind of big and bloated. They don't even look like wagons anymore. And but on this turbo, it has coil on plugs. And so my intention is to get the plasma ignition on there, which means I've put myself in a position to where I have to figure out how to do it. And so as soon as I do, I'm sure there'll be another, you know, presentation or something showing how I did that. I don't know if it's going to be easy for people to do, or if it's really going to require, you know, having custom coil on plugs made.
Well, that's very exciting, Aaron. You know, to be able to see your progress on that particular technology, because it's very exciting when you see the amplification happening across the spark gap. So right, and so for people who are interested in this, they can go to the they can get the plasma. Start my video. There you go. Okay, so make sure that the bandwidth is there. Right, yeah, so for people to get interested, they can get the plasma ignition packages describing this technology on the ignitionsecrets.com website. Is that right?
They can, or, you know, for everybody in your community, it might be easier if they find a link either on fringeenergy.com, you know,
Fringe Energy will have that
or something. Yeah, and I do want to mention that, you know, the underlying method on how it increases power, reduces emissions, lets an engine run cooler, is very important for people to know. It's typically believed and quite often parroted by people that you can't lean an engine out without it overheating. That's always been a half-truth. Typically 14.7 parts air to 1 part fuel is the ideal so-called stoichiometrical mix for an ideal, you know, gasoline combustion engine, internal combustion engine. But that's not true. If you lean it out, you can go as lean as you want. The issue is as long as you are able to properly ignite an ultra lean mixture, and actually the internal combustion engine runs the most effective at ultra lean mixtures, which is something that lot of, SAE certified mechanics and engineers and everything are going to dispute, but I can prove them wrong 100% of the time. So what it is, see, when people add so-called HHO, let's just say commonly ducted water gas out of an electrolyzer, they add that to their air intake, they can get a little bit of extra mileage as long as they can defeat the computer sabotage or lean out their carburetor on their car, if it's an old carburetor car or whatever, and, increase in power, increase in mileage, reduced emissions and so forth, cleaner running engine. Those benefits don't come from the hydrogen adding any more explosion, to the combustion cycle. When people are adding that hydrogen to the engine, it's easy for a simple spark ignition to detonate that hydrogen. When that hydrogen detonates, it flashes really, really fast and really, really hot into the combustion chamber, and that's what more thoroughly ignites the rest of the mixture. So that so-called HHO is an igniter. It is not an energy fuel source. You already have that fuel, and that's your gasoline air mixture. And the HHO detonating is just an igniter. It's a secondary igniter. Regular spark detonates the hydrogen, and the hydrogen is what ignites the rest of the fuel. That way you can actually lean the engine out, and you can actually get cooler temperatures. Because when you lean it out and you get a cooler temperature, that's showing you have increased thermal efficiency of the engine. So the plasma ignition is essentially doing that same kind of thing in a more fancy way. And there's a synergy between using the hydrogen and the plasma ignition together. I mean, you can just mist regular tap water on it. So what happens is when you have the plasma ignition in the engine and the plasma ignition detonates, anything that is exposed to that plasma is instantly dissociated to its atomic form. The hydrogen from the hydrocarbon molecules in the gasoline will be dissociated. So you're freeing up that hudrogen. When you free up hydrogen to the atomic state, the volume of that hydrogen increases about 300%. You have about roughly, I think, three times more volume in fuel. And it's any moisture in the air, it's going to dissociate the hydrogen from the oxygen out of any of the moisture in the air. And so as soon as the regular spark sparks and the cap discharges and you get that plasma impulse, it's dissociating all that, creating all this atomic hydrogen species, and then all that hydrogen detonates and it flashes into the combustion chamber and it more thoroughly detonates and ignites all the rest of that fuel. So that's why you can go lean, 14.7 to 1 is normal. You can go 20, 25 to 1. And what happens is one person did this over in Australia. He used to be a pretty frequent member in Energetic Forum, old 1300cc VW Bug, and he leaned out his engine. He put the plasma ignition on there. He had water dripping on through a little dripper on his exhaust manifold, and it would flash steam, and he ducted that with some little cowling right back to the air intake. He increased gas mileage by about 43%, and his mileage went something like 28 to 43 miles to gallon, or 32 to 43 miles to gallon. It just happened to correspond to a 43% increase in mileage, but his engine temperature dropped over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That right there just stops all the nonsense that's out there about lean engines. And so 100 degrees cooler, that is a very profound testimonial as to what's possible with this plasma ignition. And so you can get increased mileage, more power and performance out of the engine while reducing the emissions and keeping the engine cleaner, which means your oil is going to last longer. Anything related to carbon, carbon is maintenance in an engine long term, and that's long-term income for the dealerships and the garages and everything. And if you kept a very clean burning engine, then a lot of those problems are out the window. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to touch on some of those benefits of the plasma and how it's actually working with that combustion cycle. And that plasma is so strong. In government tests on the old antiquated methods of doing the plasma, they can cold start E85 ethanol fuel in sub-freezing temperatures. which is absolutely unheard of.
That's crazy.
Normally you have to start it, I guess, on regular gas, and after it's warmed up, then they can go to the ethanol. But this will, cold start ethanol in sub-freezing temperatures, and you can actually run a gasoline engine on diesel with this plasma ignition. And there's actually quite a few people who have done it on little gas generators. They'll put the plasma ignition on there, and takes a little bit of fiddling, tuning and stuff. But once they got it, you can run a gasoline engine on diesel. Obviously, diesel is usually more expensive than gas. No benefit there. But if you're able to do this with, cooking grease, whatever, emergency situations, you're not going to be, stuck without electricity. So that in itself is a huge testimonial. If this plasma ignition can run a gasoline engine on diesel, that's just completely unheard of. And it's all true.
That is absolutely amazing. All right, so we're going to go ahead and try to close out, Aaron. I know there are some questions, and we'll try to get a few, but I know we're at an hour and 20, and we're going to have to have on much later after the conference, when we can, regroup. So to close out, who else will be at the conference?
So as far as presenters, let's see, I'll be giving a couple presentations. I know that Dr. Jack Hanlon, who's on your call today, he'll be giving a talk on geometric algebra and how it applies to switched reluctance type motor generator technology and using reactive power as real power. And I know that's very related to the QEG. And I don't have a strong math background, but when Jack talked to him in length on the phone about it, and he gave me a couple analogies, and it was the first time I actually got excited about, getting back into learning some math again, because it made sense. And I think in principle, most people are going to be able to understand it. And, Paul Babcock, he's going to be giving a talk on pulsed DC concepts, dealing with time and actual time resets and manipulating time in circuits. And I think a lot of that's going to be heavily based on some of Harold Aspen's work. A lot of people these days in that field don't know too much about him, but he had some very simple stuff that was also all boiled down to, I think, pretty simple algebra. We're going to have Dr. James DeMayo, of Oregon Labs in Oregon. He's one of the world's leading authorities on Reichian, the teachings of Wilhelm Reich, I think both in psychology and a lot of his work on orgone, and also the interferometer experiments of Michelson Morley and Dayton Miller. And a lot of people claim that, Michelson Morley proved that there was no ether. Nothing can be further from the truth. They did have positive results, and Dayton Miller pretty much put the final nail in the coffin. Einstein knew it, and Einstein was he communicated with Dayton Miller and even admitted, if his findings hold up, that his entire model of relativity as it stands will fall like a house of cards, and the only thing that will remain is the equivalency between inertia and gravity. And on his 70th or 71st birthday, Einstein admitted that, it looks like everything is all calm and, cool and everything, but what it comes down to is he's not even sure he was ever on the right track with everything. And that's primarily, I think, because of Dayton Miller's work. And so all the Einstein stuff really is propaganda. We're going to have, I've looked at the schedule like a million times in the last month, and it's, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm trying to think who else is going to be there. There's going to be, I think, Chris Machado. I think he's going to be doing a small-scale interferometer experiment. We're going to have Mike Clark, Dr. Mike Clark. He's a chiropractor out of Idaho, and he's built a motor which is kind of like an air core type Bedini SG, kind of scaled up, but it's using a circuit developed by Paul Babcock.
Wow.
This thing is going to show mechanical work. It's going to run, and the batteries are going to be kept up.
Cool.
This thing is an amazing, amazing machine. There's going to be, there's probably about 17 presenters. We're also going to have a couple evening presentations on contract manufacturing. We're going to have an attorney who was on the team who helped John Bedini's company get his patents for some of his SG technology. This attorney will be Kevin Jablonski. He's going to be giving a talk on intellectual property. But it's Eric Dollard. He's going to be giving two presentations. He's going to be presenting on, it'll be about 4.5 hour presentation on Tesla's Colorado Springs magnifying transmitter. with a 20-to-1 scale model replica, and I've already saw what this does. It's not going to be full power, but it's going to be enough to prove the point. Next year in 2020, the goal is to get that full power. And when people see this, they'll understand that most of the understanding about the Colorado Springs that's online is mostly wrong. There's a lot of misunderstandings about it, and the entire concept of scaling is not really true. It's not really scalable in a linear sense, you know. But Eric's going to break all that down, and he did all the calculations. And we have a guy on the East Coast, Bruce Gavin, who's a very talented radio engineer, and he's been building this for Eric based on Eric's specs. And whatever Eric came out with, the thing was within less than like 1% when he actually got it together, tuning, did the experiment. So if anybody has any doubt that Eric is not, you know, the Tesla man, they got another thing coming. They're gonna love this presentation, and he's going to be speaking on his advanced seismic warning system, electrodynamic earthquake forecasting. Yeah, so it's a jam-packed schedule. If anybody wants to see, they can go to energyscienceconference.com, and there's a 2019 conference schedule link in the main menu bar, and that'll break down the whole schedule over the whole 4 days.
Great,
So,
and you already have seats. You already opened up for 2020 for people to buy tickets for 2020 or make their pre-book. Is that right?
Yeah. People can register if they've registered before for this conference or other ones. They don't really have to pre-register because I'm just going to take all the registrations and move it under the 2020. And so anybody who is not registered, they can go there. They can pre-register for 2020, so they'll be the first to get all the announcements. And I won't open up for ticket sales until probably in February or so. It's just easier for accounting if I do it after the end of the year. That's why I don't want to pre-sell the tickets or whatever. And they will sell out quick. And there's going to be some extra surprises at the 2020 conference. You know, full scale 20-to-1 Colorado Springs. That's going to blow people's mind. And I have a lot of equipment or a lot of stuff that I bought all the way down to the last little resistor. These old vacuum tubes. There's a thing that Eric Dollard designed.
Wow.
That I got all the stuff to build it. The transformer alone is 100 pounds.
Oh, wow.
From the early 1900s RCA AM broadcast high fidelity transformer. It's 100 pounds. And there's going to be another identical unit. And when I put those together, we're going to do some demonstrations that's going to, man, it's just going to blow people's minds. I'm so excited to I'm going to start working on putting that together and building that. It's so big and everything, it's going to go on my two military rack mount units. 19-inch rack mount units going to be wheeled in there to do this demo. It's going to take a truck to get this thing there, but it's, yeah, if anybody has not gone to a conference, you're coming to 2019 conference, you're going to want to go to 2020. Just commit to go there because you can't not go there when you start, you know, learning some of the stuff that we're going to be showing there.
Okay, great, excellent. So on that note, I'm going to give it over to Hope, and I know some of the questions we have to get it really short. But you know, I know Aaron's extremely busy, and let's give everyone a chance to at least ask one question. So, yeah, I'll give it over to you, Hope.
Sure.
Well, yeah, we do have one question in here in the chat. So let me just go find that real quick. And the question is a couple questions. So first is, John says, I did a plasma system back in 2007. The first question is, are you sure the diode reversed is not breaking down so it flows through to charge the cap? So that's the first question. And the second question I'll read now, how do you prevent the spark plug from deteriorating? He says, I moved to looking into the Joe X Cell Standmeyer stuff. So
okay, so when the high voltage spark jumps, it will hit the diode going to the cap. So a small percentage of that spark will indeed go and charge that capacitor, but it's just a tiny little insignificant amount. Then once that reverse rating of that high voltage diode is met, that diode shuts off and there is no more going there. It's all going over the gap.
So it has some reverse breakdown is going through it somehow. It's like it's because there's a reverse breakdown of diodes, and it will conduct in that direction even though that you try to prevent it. You know, I mean, I've done it. I was just saying,
Sure.
And then the deterioration is what I've had. I mean, I've done the same thing, and I can explode water too that way. I did it, but it was deteriorating the spark plug, and I had to move. I was going to do like a tungsten spark plug or something, and just try to, I was playing around with it too, and then I got an interest in the Joe XL. So I don't know. So whatever method you're doing, is it's allowing it so it doesn't deteriorate the spark plug?
No, it's brutal on spark plugs, and they'll have short life. That's just how it is.
So that's right, all of that.
Oh yeah. No, I've
okay.
all my big monster plasma blasts, I had a spark plug last probably about an hour.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
So
but now here's one of the things. In an off-the-shelf CDI, like the Street Fire, that's kind of the budget MSD model. I think it's about an 89 millijoule cap or something. It's about 450 volts at, I don't know, around 2 microfarads, 2.5, something like that. And so you want to keep the capacitance fairly small to extend the life, because you don't want a blast too big, because it can break off little tiny pieces of metal from the spark plug, and you don't want that running in the cylinder and scraping.
That's
kind of deal.
happened.
Yeah, and so ideally they're going to be like a tungsten kind of plug. People are getting fairly long life out of fairly inexpensive. Do you know what a surface gap plug is? Normally you got a center electrode and you have the little ground strap. They basically have no ground strap, and so it's just circle with the center electrode in the middle, so it jumps over to the side. People are getting pretty good life out of those. It needs a custom plug made for super long life. I know in the past some people had made some spark plug modifications. I don't know if you ever heard of Robert Krupa. Robert Krupa invented the split fire spark plug. So on the J strap, it's got a little split, kind of like a little snake tongue. And so that spark goes back and forth. It has long life, a little bit more robust spark. Well, he invented a plug called the Firestorm plug, which on the center electrode, there's like a little half sphere, little hemisphere there.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Mushroom head.
Yeah.
And instead of a J strap, it had loops going over every 180 degrees. So every 90 degrees, there's a loop. And that geometry of a plug will last a long time. Robert Krupa's patents are all public domain now. I've corresponded with him before. He always tried to show this picture of a regular spark plug sparking, and then he showed the Firestorm plug where you got all this white, bright plasma jumping around all over the plug, making it look like that plug geometry was creating all that massive plasma. It's just not going to happen. If you don't have the plasma ignition, it's just going to be a regular spark. He used a spark amplifier unit from a company called Green Hornet or something, which was the old antiquated method of an individual cap charger, and that discharged over his spark plug. So he was using the plasma ignition. He didn't want anybody to know about it. That's what he was doing. So if you have the means to have some of those custom plugs made, that's going to be probably the longest lasting plug you can find. In EnergyScienceForum.com, you can search for plasma ignition. I have an official support forum for people working on these projects and who bought the Ignition Secrets package. And there's a lot of people in there with a lot of experience with it now who are giving their feedback on what plugs lasted the longest for them. I would encourage you to go in there and look through there. There's a lot of posts, but there's a lot of good information in there. This type of ignition early on, when it was first invented, it's actually referred to as plasma jet ignition. The reason is because it was never intended to be used with a regular spark plug. It was intended to be used with a spark plug where at the end of the spark plug, the center electrode is recessed down inside of a cavity. So all you have is a piece of metal here with a little hole in there. And so what happens is, as that plasma ignites inside that little cavity, it shoots out that hole, and it's shaped kind of like a candle flame or a little jet kind of shape, like a long cone. And that was intended to project deep into the combustion chamber for the spark plug, and that was called a plasma jet igniter. And so nobody's manufacturing those igniter plugs. I want to make some using a non-fouler. I don't know if you know what a non-fouler is, but if you have a spark plug that's fouling out, there's a little adapter you can buy for I don't know, $4 or $5 at a car parts store. You screw it onto the base of the spark plug, and then you screw that into to the head of the engine. And what it does is it has a little hole there, but it recesses the plug out of the combustion chamber a little bit, and that reduces the fouling. Well, the cavity in there is way too big to get that kind of effect. And so if you machined one from scratch and you had a little cavity in there where that whole thing screwed onto the base of the spark plug, and then you screw that into the combustion chamber, you could make your own igniter to create that little jet, that little hole for the jet to shoot out of. And that's really the original way it was intended to be used. I've never done that. I've never made one of those plugs. When I have time at some point, I want to have some of those made. And so the Robert Krupa Firestorm plug is one way I would go, and the plasma igniter plug is the other for super long life.
Thank you. That's good. Okay. Anyway, I don't want to say too much more. You guys people got to do things also. I don't want to take too much. I play with the Joe XL too, so I could talk forever for that too. But just that's it. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, sure. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. And I don't see any other questions in the chat. There was one comment way back in the beginning of the phone call I do want to bring out when we were talking about Monsanto. Someone brought up Monsanto. The Bayer recently were fined on a settlement to 2 people who got cancer from ingesting Roundup. The settlement was hundreds of millions plus $1 billion USD per person because it was proved in court that Monsanto knew what Roundup causes cancer, and they put a link to the patent, and the patent number is US 4407259. So if anybody wanted to look that up for themselves, I wanted to make sure we brought that out. And thanks for bringing out that case. So anyway, this has been an incredible call. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us. We wanted to...
my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, best of luck in the conference. Thanks for giving Jack a shout out for his presentation. We're really excited to see what Jack's presentation is going to be like, and maybe we'll have Jack on later on after the conference to maybe give us a little bit of an update on how that whole thing went. But we've taken a look at some of your work, Jack, and we're really excited about that as well. So if anybody needs any links to anything we talked about in this call, wherever you're watching this video, those links will be in the description box below. Thanks again so much, everybody, for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this call, and we will see you in another couple of weeks on the Clean Energy Academy. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm James from the Clean Energy Academy, coming to you here from my QEG lab in the United States.
Hi, I'm Taban from the Clean Energy Academy, and I'm coming to you live from our lab in Morocco.
The Clean Energy Academy is a member-only community that is the home of the QEG and Mini QEG.
This is the only platform of its kind in a controversial industry of energy inventions that allows for safe sharing of ideas in a troll-free environment.
The Academy holds a tremendous amount of in-depth technical information, reports, schematics, and engineering data based around the co-development of open-source alternative energy devices.
You can learn more about our QEG project by visiting our website, cleanenergyacademy.com, or by watching our documentary film, Chasing Tesla, which also can be found on our website.
Twice a month we hold live calls that cover the latest updates on our QEG project work, and also include special guest speakers and presentations on related energy topics.
Members get invites to our live calls and archives. Non-members can purchase archives of our calls at our online shop.
Members also get access to our project reports and our builders forums.
These forums include documentation around testing results, experimentation descriptions, and detailed project explanations.
We also have a wide selection of members-only video galleries that feature project footage that you won't find anywhere else.
We have some additional sign-on bonus features and low-cost monthly membership plans for instant access now available at the link below.
Again, click the link below for more information on where you can get archives of our live calls and access to all the benefits of being a member of the Clean Energy Academy.
So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you join the exciting co-development work at the Clean Energy Academy.